Romance of Sui and Tang Dynasties Chapter 98.
Think about the agonizing grief of outliving someone you love. Just that sheer heart-wrenching pain of walking through a room and stumbling across some everyday item they left behind.
Yeah, it's a completely devastating feeling.
It really is. And our source text actually opens with a powerful reflection on this exact universal human experience.
Right.
It specifically highlights the emotional impact of finding just a single embroidered sock scattered on the ground, left behind by a lost love.
And that opening with the sock, it really grounds the narrative in this raw, palpable psychological state way before the larger historical machinery even begins to turn.
Exactly. Chapter 98.
Which is such a rich source. It operates as both a historical and a literary account. It weaves the very real, brutal trauma of the Andalusian rebellion with this deeply personal, almost mythological narrative of survival.
We are going to trace that specific narrative arc.
Right.
We're looking at a story that begins as a devastating historical tragedy, just steeped in the unbearable grief of a displaced ruler, and then it transforms quite abruptly into a wild, mythical great escape.
Which is why this matters so much. This isn't just some dusty old text. It's a really profound look at how humans process unimaginable loss.
Wow.
It shows the sheer desperation of grief and how historical accounts intertwine with magical realism to basically explain survival against all odds.
Okay, let's unpack this. For those who might know the history, our core characters here are Emperor Shangwang, formerly Emperor Hunzong, and his absolute beloved consort Mei, Jiang Keiping.
Yes.
So Shangwang is currently exiled in Shu. The rebellion has swept through the capital of Cheyenne, and he fully believes consort Mei is dead.
Right. Because word has reached him that a female corpse was found in the palace during the absolute chaos of the rebellion.
Which brings us back to that embroidered sock. Have you ever found an old item belonging to a loved one and just felt that sudden physical rush of memory?
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And his isolation in Shu cannot be overstated here. He's a ruler who has lost his capital, he's lost much of his power, and now he believes his great love.
Yeah.
The text focuses heavily on the aftermath of this separation. It's one thing to lose someone in the chaos of a fleeing court, right? But it is entirely another to sit in exile, surrounded by the silence of the mountains in Shu, and have nothing but time to dwell on a solitary brocade sock. Or a misplaced hair ornament.
Yeah.
The material remnants of her life just become instruments of psychological torture.
And he still has the remaining resources of an empire at his disposal, even in exile.
He does.
But instead of marshaling troops to go search the ruins of the capital, his first instinct is to turn to the metaphysical. He hires a Taoist mystic named Zhang Shanren to literally search the afterlife for her soul. Which, what drives a former emperor to bypass physical searches and immediately seek out a mystic to scour the underworld?
It speaks to the absolute certainty he had regarding her death. The discovery of that female corpse in the palace was viewed as definitive proof.
Right, so in his mind, the physical realm is a dead end.
Exactly. It no longer held any answers for him. Turning to Zhang Shanren was a manifestation of ultimate desperation. He commands this mystic to breach the boundaries of mortality itself.
And the text goes into detail about this. Zhang Shanren builds an altar and sits in silent meditation for a full 24 hours.
Yes, a rigorous Taoist ritual designed to detach the spirit from the physical form.
And it mentions he sends his soul roaming through all three realms of existence.
Which is a crucial cosmological detail here. The three realms, heaven, earth, and the underworld, they represent the entirety of existence in this belief system.
Wow.
Zhang Shanren is essentially conducting an exhaustive audit of the universe. He's looking through the celestial palaces, scouring the physical earth, wandering the courts of the dead, all attempting to locate the specific spiritual signature of consort Mei.
But he returns to the emperor with devastating news.
Yeah.
He claims to have searched everywhere, but there is no trace of her soul. And he even adds that he couldn't find the soul of another lost love, Tai Zhen, either.
Which is just a crushing blow.
The emperor's reaction is heartbreaking. He asks, where has her fragrant soul gone? And he just breaks down weeping.
The failure of the mystic serves as an absolute terminal confirmation of loss for him. If a master Taoist cannot find her in the heavens or the underworld, it strips away that very last sliver of spiritual hope.
It's final.
Exactly. It suggests a total obliteration of her existence, forcing the emperor to confront a terrifying finality. This realization pushes him into a new, more obsessive phase of mourning, one anchored entirely in memory rather than any hope for a spiritual reunion.
And this transition brings us to the portrait.
Oh, yeah.
A eunuch Gao Lishi, witnesses the emperor's unyielding suffering and presents him with a hyper-realistic painting of Consort Mei.
Right.
The emperor looks at this painting and sighs, saying it's exactly like her, just not alive.
Portraits in this literary tradition often serve as a double-edged sword. They offer the comfort of perfect recall, but constantly punish the viewer with the subject's inanimate nature.
The hyperrealism of it almost makes it worse.
It only deepens the wound. It brings her physical form into his space with perfect clarity, highlighting the unbearable reality of her absence. He's staring at a flawless representation of life that cannot breathe or speak.
He's so moved by it that he actually writes a poem directly onto the painting itself.
Yes.
He praises her appearance as she used to stand in the Purple Palace, specifically noting her natural grace. He writes about how she never needed heavy makeup to enhance her beauty. But the poem concludes with this deep, tragic frustration. He laments that while the painted silk perfectly captures her past appearance, those painted eyes can never look back at him.
Writing the poem directly onto the painting is an act of profound intimacy, but also futility. He's trying to interact with her, layering his current grief over her frozen past image.
Right.
And the specific mention of the Purple Palace transports his mind back to the height of their shared life in Chang'an, which contrasts so sharply with his current bleak reality in Shu.
It's a stark difference.
And that fixation on her unmoving eyes represents the ultimate failure of art to replace life. The text notes he constantly unrolls this painting to stare at it, basically trapping himself in an endless, agonizing loop of memory and loss.
But then the narrative energy suddenly shifts gears. A rumor begins to circulate through the displaced court.
A massive turning point.
Whispers suggest that the corpse found in the palace wasn't Consort Mei at all. They say she might actually be alive, lost somewhere among the common people in the aftermath of the rebellion.
What's fascinating here is the psychological whiplash. The emperor moves from the depths of passive terminal mourning to a state of explosive bureaucratic action.
It's a total 180.
The very structure of the story pivots from an intimate elegy to a sweeping empire-wide mobilization. He weaponizes the entire remaining apparatus of his state to find her.
He issues an edict to the military, civilians, and scholars. He declares that anyone who finds Jiang Quping or escorts her safely to his location will be awarded a 6th-rank official title and 1 million copper coins.
It's wild.
For those who might not have the Tang bureaucratic hierarchy memorized, just how significant is a 6th-rank official title combined with that amount of currency?
It is an astronomical, life-altering reward. The Tang bureaucracy was strictly stratified into 9 ranks. Achieving a 6th-rank position typically required passing incredibly rigorous imperial examinations or years of steady, prestigious service.
So you couldn't just buy your way in easily?
No, it elevated a person and their family firmly into the ruling elite. It granted them significant political power, land privileges, and social status.
And the money?
1 million copper coins is a multi-generational fortune. Offering as to anyone, even a commoner or a foot soldier, demonstrates a willingness to completely upend the established social order. He is essentially offering a kingdom's ransom for one single person.
The pacing of events accelerates dramatically following this edict. Emperor Sezong, who has taken control of the empire's recovery efforts, sends a memorial, an official document confirming he has news of her whereabouts.
Right.
Shang is currently traveling, his carriage is moving along the road, and before he can even fully process the official memorial from Sezong, his carriage is physically intercepted.
I love this part.
An envoy stops a procession carrying a handwritten letter directly from Consort Mei.
The physical interception of the imperial carriage is just a brilliant narrative device. It mirrors the emotional interception the emperor is experiencing. His grief, which had been driving him steadily forward into despair, is literally halted in its tracks.
That's a great way to put it.
The transition from staring at a silent, unmoving portrait to holding a physical letter written by her own hand bridges the gap between the dead past and the living present.
But the contents of this letter are a stark departure from the romanticized memory of the portrait. Consort Mei recounts the raw chaos of the rebellion's outbreak.
It's brutal.
She describes the court officials scattering in terror, the emperor fleeing west, and the distinct, crushing feeling of being left behind to await orders that never came as the capital collapsed around her.
Her account strips away all the grandeur of the imperial court and exposes the grim reality of a collapsing dynasty.
Yeah.
Her psychological state deteriorates rapidly in the face of this abandonment. She uses a very specific phrase in the letter, stating she felt her life had become lighter than a feather.
Lighter than a feather.
Yes, this is a profound articulation of absolute worthlessness. The collapse of her world, combined with the perceived abandonment by the man who was both her lover and her sovereign, leaves her feeling entirely unmoored from existence.
And this overwhelming despair leads her to attempt suicide by hanging herself. She writes that her breath was failing, placing her on the very brink of death.
Right.
But she doesn't credit her survival to a passing soldier or a loyal servant, does she? The text takes a sharp turn into the mythological at this exact moment.
Yes, the narrative deliberately blends historical trauma with explicit magical realism right here. She writes that an immortal maiden descended from the sky to intervene at the very last second.
And she gives highly specific details about this rescuer. She identifies the immortal as a woman from the Wei family of Wengwu and specifically notes that she is the wife of Zhang Guo.
Identifying the rescuer as the wife of Zhang Guo is a masterstroke of Taoist literary integration. Zhang Guo, often known as Zhang Guolao, is one of the famous 8 immortals of Taoist mythology.
Oh, wow.
By invoking his name and his wife, the text anchors Consort Mei's miraculous rescue firmly within established, highly recognizable religious lore.
So it's not just a random angel.
Exactly. It elevates her survival from a mere stroke of luck to an event of cosmic significance, orchestrated by the highest echelons of the Taoist pantheon.
And the method of their escape is perhaps the most striking visual in the entire text. I just love this part. She writes that the immortal maiden pulled a small paper donkey out of her sleeve to facilitate their flight.
Yes, the paper donkey. It's deeply intertwined with the specific mythology of Zhang Guolao, who was famous for riding a magical white bat or a paper donkey that he could literally fold up and put in his pocket when he wasn't using it.
That is amazing.
In broader Taoist practice, this touches upon the concept of ziza, or paper familiars, the idea that paper objects can be imbued with spiritual life and breath to serve the practitioner.
So the immortal transforms this paper cutout into a living, flying steed. They mount the creature and take off into the sky, traveling 1,000 miles in an instant to land safely in a place called Lenyang.
Analyzing how the text deploys this divine intervention reveals a lot about the cultural mindset of the era. We shouldn't necessarily get bogged down in the literal mechanics of a flying paper donkey.
Sure.
The narrative function of the magic is to frame Consort Mei's survival as an act of divine destiny. The chaos of the Anlushan rebellion was so horrific, so devoid of logic or justice, that mere survival felt insufficient.
It needed a grander explanation.
Right. To explain how someone so pure and loyal survived such a cataclysm, the text requires the heavens themselves to break the rules of reality to save her.
That makes a lot of sense. So her letter continues by describing her subsequent hideout, which stands in stark contrast to the bloody ruins of Chang'an. She finds sanctuary at the Penjing Taoist temple, nestled deep in the white clouds.
The shift in setting from the war-torn capital to an ethereal temple in the clouds signifies a transitional state for her character.
Oh, so?
Well, she has been removed from the earthly violence, elevated to a space that borders on the divine, but she remains in a state of limbo. She is no longer part of the imperial court, but she hasn't fully ascended to immortality either. She is just waiting.
She describes her companions in the temple, too. There's a chaste female Taoist named Aunt Sue from the Luo family who mysteriously assumes Consort Mei is an immortal herself due to her sudden arrival.
Yes.
And Consort Mei simply allows her to believe this. She also shares space with a roommate, a young woman from the Daxi family, who is the concubine of a top scholar named Qin.
The introduction of these specific companions sets up a vital prophetic element in the story.
Right.
The text reveals that a master named Luo Gonggyun had previously predicted the arrival of these 2 women at the temple. He informed Aunt Sue that their stay would be strictly temporary, prophesying that they would eventually return to their respective masters.
And 2 months prior to her writing the letter, she notes that Master Luo and another immortal, Yi Fashan, visited the temple. They bestowed gifts upon Consort Mei, a branch of plum blossoms, which she emphasizes is her favorite flower, specifically noting it is a bloom from the heavenly gardens that never fades. And they gave her a poem containing a hidden message about her future.
That unfading plum branch is a really potent symbol, loaded with cultural meaning. In Chinese literary tradition, the plum blossom is the ultimate emblem of resilience, purity, and endurance.
Because it blooms in the winter, right?
Exactly. It blooms vibrantly in the dead of winter, long before other flowers dare to open. By gifting her an unfading plum branch, the immortals are acknowledging that her spirit, her loyalty, and her connection to the emperor have endured the harsh, bitter winter of the rebellion.
Oh, that's beautiful.
The unfading nature of the celestial flower promises that her bond with Chang'an will outlast the current temporal suffering.
But the protective isolation of the temple doesn't last forever. She explains near the end of the letter that envoys from the Luo and Qin families came searching for relatives and accidentally discovered them. With her secret exposed, she uses the letter to make a desperate plea to the emperor. She asks for his grace, begging to return to her old palace to live out her remaining days.
The framing of her request highlights a deep sense of humility and enduring devotion. She articulates that returning to him, even if she were simply to fall and die like a plum blossom dropping from its branch in his presence, would be vastly preferable to the tragic, isolated death she almost suffered.
She just wants to be near him.
Yes, she views the possibility of returning to his side, under whatever circumstances, as a profound blessing.
We then see the emperor's written response to this sprawling, unbelievable letter. And he replies with an official, written validation of her entire experience. He doesn't question the sudden appearance of the immortal maiden. He doesn't express any skepticism about the paper donkey flying 1,000 miles. He accepts her account completely.
His unquestioning acceptance is absolutely key to understanding the moral cosmology of the text.
Why is that?
The emperor is not focused on the mechanics of the magical rescue. His attention is entirely focused on the moral purity that prompted it. In his response, he explicitly praises her attempt at suicide.
Really?
Yes. In the context of dynastic literature, her willingness to hang herself rather than face capture or dishonor is interpreted as the zenith of loyalty and extreme devotion to her sovereign.
Wow. So he writes that it was precisely this intense sincerity and her willingness to die for her honor that moved the heavens to intervene.
Exactly. Within his worldview, the magical rescue was not an accident of fate. It was the inevitable cosmic reward for her flawless moral character.
Because she was willing to sacrifice everything.
Yes. The heavens employed an immortal and a paper donkey because she proved herself undeniably worthy. He also draws a poignant contrast between their respective experiences during their separation.
Right.
He notes the bitter irony that while he was fruitlessly searching the afterlife and torturing himself with a silent, lifeless painting, she was soaring through the clouds with the mortals and receiving celestial prophecies about their reunion.
He concludes his response by instructing her to stop weeping alone in the cold night. He asks her to reflect on his past affection for her and to prepare for his new favor. He effectively pulls the narrative full circle, taking them from a state of absolute tragic isolation and guiding them toward a joyous, heaven-ordained reunion.
It represents a masterful synthesis of profound emotional trauma and grand mythological storytelling.
And in the middle of all this, you have the Supreme Emperor.
Known in the text as the Chang'an. He's finally returning to the capital after having fled the violence. But the political landscape is totally unrecognizable now.
Because he's no longer the one pulling the strings.
Right. His son, Emperor Sezong, took the throne in his absence to lead the war effort. So you have the former ruler coming back to a city now ruled by his son.
And the structural danger of that specific dynamic, I mean, it cannot be overstated.
Two emperors in the same political space.
It's a bureaucratic nightmare. Even if the father is supposedly retired, the entire imperial system is built on absolute singular loyalty to the Son of Heaven.
Right.
Having a living former emperor creates this immediate polarized division of loyalty. It's the ultimate powder keg.
Like a hostile corporate takeover where the ousted founder just walks back into the building.
Exactly. Every official, every general, every servant has to calculate who holds the real power. And knowing that choosing wrong means death.
And looking at the sources here, the Supreme Emperor seems totally aware of that exact danger.
Oh, absolutely.
The very first thing he does upon arriving at the Fengxiang prefecture on his way back is surrender his military power.
Right.
He explicitly orders his guard to take all their armor, all their weapons, and just hand them over to the local treasury. He's completely disarming his own protective detail before he even gets close to the capital.
Which is a massive, calculated gesture of submission. He's broadcasting to his son, the new emperor, that he's not coming back to launch a counter-coup. By stripping himself of military might, he's trying to present himself as a vulnerable old man rather than a political rival. It's a desperate play for survival.
But the son's response is what makes this so incredibly tense. To escort his newly disarmed father the rest of the way, Emperor Sezong sends 3,000 elite cavalry.
Yep.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the father just surrendered all his weapons, how could he possibly be a threat? Is Suzong really that paranoid, or is this supposed to be a legitimate honor guard?
Well, in ancient imperial politics, there is no such thing as an innocent gesture.
Especially with troop movements.
Exactly. Sending 3,000 fully armed, combat-hardened elite troops to surround a newly disarmed father is a spectacular display of dominance.
So it's a threat.
It's masked as filial piety, the son providing a grand escort. But the subtext is entirely hostile. Suzong is essentially saying, I respect you as my father, but I also have the military infrastructure to crush you instantly.
Wow.
The paranoia is absolutely justified because Suzong knows his own legitimacy is fragile as long as his father draws breath.
And that passive-aggressive tension really sets the stage for their actual face-to-face meeting. It reads like a masterclass in performative politics.
It really does.
Suzong brings all the government officials out of the city gates. The common people are blocking the roads, bowing, shouting, "Long live the emperor!"
And what does Suzong do?
He falls entirely to the ground in front of his father's carriage, weeping uncontrollably.
Yeah.
But the sources place a huge emphasis on what they are wearing.
Yes, the wardrobe choices are critical here.
Suzong refuses to wear the imperial yellow robe. He shows up wearing a purple robe instead. What's the subtext there?
The color of the robe is everything in this heavily codified society. Purple is the color of a subordinate official. By wearing it, Suzong is visually declaring to the assembled court, I am just a humble servant to my father.
Which is brilliant political theater.
It is. He even begs his father to take the throne back. But both men are trapped in a script they can't deviate from.
Right, because if the father actually accepts the throne,
it's a declaration of civil war.
And if the son doesn't offer it.
He looks like a power-hungry usurper who ousted his own father.
So the Supreme Emperor plays his part perfectly to defuse the trap. He refuses the throne, and he actually has to order an attendant to brook out a yellow robe and force his son to put it on right there in the street.
A literal passing of the mantle.
Exactly, and it continues. When they finally head back to the city, Suzong refuses to ride in his own carriage or on a horse. He insists on walking on foot in the dirt next to his father's carriage,
Acting like a common groom.
which forces the Supreme Emperor to repeatedly command him to stop.
It's a survival mechanism for both of them. And the Supreme Emperor turns to the officials during this procession and says something incredibly telling.
Right, he says, I was the son of heaven for 50 years, and I didn't think it made me truly venerable. But today, being the father of the son of heaven, that makes me the ultimate venerable.
Which sounds like a proud dad moment on the surface.
But given the cavalry surrounding them, it feels deeply calculated.
It's pure self-preservation. He is actively carving out a new identity that demands respect, but poses zero political threat.
By claiming the title of the ultimate venerable as a father.
Right, he's stepping out of the political hierarchy entirely. He immediately follows this up with an edict stating he's retiring to the Xingfeng Palace in the south, explicitly promising he will no longer involve himself in any government affairs whatsoever.
He's building his own gilded cage.
Exactly, to assure his son he won't interfere.
And the author of the text ensures we don't miss this dark subtext. There's a poem inserted right into the narrative that acts as a voice of historical skepticism.
It asks the exact questions we are asking.
Right. If this father-son reunion is so warm and innocent, why did the father's armor and weapons have to go into the treasury? And to welcome a beloved father, you just need a ceremonial procession. Why deploy 3,000 elite cavalry?
The poet cuts right through the theatrical tears and the purple robes.
The political paranoia is suffocating.
But just as we settle into this gritty Machiavellian power struggle, the source material introduces a massive thematic shift. We move away from the harsh reality of military disarmament and step directly into the realm of the supernatural.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The Supreme Emperor settles into his retirement at the Xingqing Palace, and he reunites with his former love, Consort Mei.
Also known as Mei Fei.
Right. She had been left behind during the violent rebellion. And surviving a war zone as a high-ranking imperial consort is practically impossible. Usually they're captured, ransomed, or killed.
But she's alive.
She is. And when she tells the emperor her survival story, it is entirely driven by Taoist magic. She claims she was rescued by the wife of a famous immortal named Zhang Guo.
The contrast is jarring, isn't it? We go from analyzing the troop movements of an elite cavalry to discussing divine intervention. Consort Mei explains she didn't just hide in a cellar, she was spirited away by ethereal figures.
The details she shares are wild. She says she escaped on a magical paper donkey.
A paper donkey.
Yes, and the text notes that this paper donkey was likely pulled right out of the immortal Zhang Guo's personal towel box.
Like a magical handkerchief that transforms into a getaway vehicle.
Exactly. Why does the author drop something this fantastical right into the middle of a tense historical narrative?
It reflects how the people of that era integrated myth, philosophy, and history to process the incomprehensible. A war that wipes out millions of people feels like the end of the world.
So for a delicate imperial consort to survive the slaughter, realism isn't enough to explain it.
Right. To the emperor and to the readers of this romance, divine intervention is the only logical explanation for her survival. The magic isn't just a plot device, it's a coping mechanism for trauma. Notice how the emperor reacts.
He doesn't dismiss her as delusional.
No, he actually validates it.
He recalls that years ago, he tried to arrange a marriage between his own sister, the Jade Princess, and this exact immortal, Zhang Guo. But Zhang Guo refused, claiming he already had a wife, Lady Wei, hiding in the Wengwu Mountains. So for the emperor, Consort Mei's story confirms a piece of his own past.
He treats the magic as historical fact. It bridges his glorious past with his devastating present.
And Consort Mei brings physical proof too. She shows the emperor a gift she received from another mortal, Ye Shan.
The plum blossom.
Yes, a single plum blossom, but it's described as crystal clear and incredibly fragrant. It's a deeply personal nod to her identity, since her title, Mei Fei, translates to consort plum.
Which the emperor is amazed by.
He tells her that with an immortal plum blossom like this, she truly lives up to her name. But the most impactful part of her story comes when she reveals a prophetic poem given to her by a third immortal, Luo Gongguan.
And this is the moment the Supreme Emperor has a massive realization about his own downfall. What's fascinating here is how the text offers a profound commentary on leadership, accountability, and the concept of destiny. The emperor starts piecing together clues from his past, realizing these immortals had been trying to warn him about the rebellion for years.
Looking at the linguistic puzzles in the sources here, it's fascinating how the immortals communicated. The immortal Luo Gongguan had once sent the emperor a letter with a specific warning.
Do not forget danger in times of peace.
Right. And the Chinese word for peace is an,
which happens to be the surname of the rebel leader who destroyed the empire, An Lushan. The immortal was offering a double meaning, warning him not to forget the danger of An Lushan long before the rebellion sparked.
And the botanical prophecy is even more specific. Luo Gongguan also sent the emperor a medicinal herb called Shu Dengi.
Sichuan Angelica.
Right. But if you break down the literal characters of that name, it spells out the emperor's exact fate during the war. Shu refers to the region of Sichuan, which is exactly where the emperor was forced to flee when the capital fell.
And Dengi means ought to return.
You will flee to Sichuan, but you ought to return.
When the emperor, sitting in his gilded cage of a retirement palace, realizes this, it shatters his worldview. He realizes the universe had mapped out his tragic trajectory years in advance, and he had been entirely blind to it.
He's so overwhelmed by this realization that he says, today, thinking about it, not a single word failed to come true.
And then he acts on it immediately.
He starts handing out massive rewards to the mortal relatives of these immortals. Manning Luo Kai gets a 3-level official promotion on the spot and a huge sum of coins.
1 million coins, I believe.
Yes, and a woman named Luo Sugu is given the grand title of Chaste and Quiet Immortal Master, plus 2 million coins to repair her temple. He even orders statues of all 3 immortals to be built and worshipped. Why the sudden grand display of wealth and titles?
It's a brilliant psychological defense mechanism. By richly rewarding these immortals and leaning into the narrative of fate, the emperor is shifting the blame for the empire's collapse.
That makes a lot of sense.
If the rebellion and his exile were foretold by divine beings and written into the very names of medicinal herbs, then it absolves him of his political failures.
He can tell himself he didn't lose the empire because he was a negligent ruler who trusted the wrong generals.
Exactly. He lost it because it was a grand, preordained cosmic plan. Embracing destiny becomes a shield against the crushing weight of his own accountability.
That is so true. And this theme of cosmic plans and prophecies shaping reality isn't just applied to the emperor. The sources give us a really satisfying subplot involving Consort Mei's good friend Daxi Yingying.
Yes, the mansion.
Through a complex series of events, Yingying is gifted a massive, luxurious estate in the capital. But this isn't just any house. It's the former mansion of the Lady of Guogo.
And for context, the Lady of Guga was a notoriously wealthy, powerful figure before the rebellion.
Right. Gifting this estate to Ying is the equivalent of suddenly handing someone the keys to a disgraced billionaire's mega mansion.
And this windfall directly ties back to the prophetic poem Consort May received. One of the lines in that Taoist poem was, "Painted scenery becomes real."
Exactly. How does that connect to Ying's new mansion?
Previously, Ying had been looking at a literal painting of this exact mansion with the man she loved, a scholar named Qin Gushan. At the time, she was keeping her true identity a secret from him.
But now, post-rebellion, she has been handed the physical deed to the actual mansion from the painting.
The text explicitly refers to this as turning fiction into reality. It's a core Taoist concept playing out in the narrative. If a solid, invincible empire can vanish overnight into nothingness, then why can't a beautiful painting manifest into solid reality?
The boundaries between what's real and what's illusion are completely blurred by the chaos of the war.
Exactly.
It provides a fairy tale resolution for her character. She's reunited with the scholar, Qin Gushan, and they're able to marry. The text highlights that the scholar's first wife, who happens to be a descendant of a highly prestigious historical figure, Zhu Maogong, welcomes Ying with open arms.
The sources tell us the wives get along perfectly, they raise noble children, and the men achieve highly successful careers.
It is the ultimate happy ending amidst the rubble of the capital.
Which is deliberately placed there by the author to serve as a sharp contrast to the fate of our main characters. Ying gets the fairy tale ending, turning a painting into a real life. But when the narrative pivots back to Consort May and the Supreme Emperor, the reality of their situation is much darker.
And much more complicated. Despite surviving the war, despite the paper donkey escapes and the magical plum blossoms, Consort May is deeply traumatized.
The weight of time and history is crushing her.
She approaches the emperor, weeping so hard the text says her tears fall like rain. She begs him to let her leave the Xingqing Palace and be banished to the Shenyang Palace.
She tells him, "I am old. My beauty is fading. I was previously slandered and fell out of favor."
Right. You need someone young and beautiful to comfort you in your old age. I should step aside.
It's a devastatingly poignant moment that grounds the story back in harsh realism. She survived immortals and brutal war zones, only to feel utterly inadequate in the quiet aftermath.
She expects to be discarded.
In the harsh reality of the imperial court, women who aged or lost their political backing were routinely cast aside. Her survivor's guilt is compounded by the belief that she no longer has value in this new, diminished world.
But the Supreme Emperor's response is emotionally raw. It completely strips away the political artifice we saw earlier with his son. He refuses to let her go.
He takes full responsibility for how she was treated before the war.
He tells her, "It was my fault I neglected you in the past." He points out that even when they were separated by war and palace intrigue, they still exchanged gifts, like pearls, proving their connection never really died.
He practically begs her.
Yes, saying, "How can you bear to abandon me to live elsewhere when I have no one else to comfort me in my old age?"
Look at who he is in this moment. He is a man who lost his empire, his absolute power, and much of his family. He was stripped of his armor, forced to grovel in political theater, and is now guarded by his own son's hostile cavalry.
Consort May is his only remaining link to his past life.
A past where he was truly in control and loved. He refuses to lose her too. In the end, stripped of everything, they only have each other to rely on. And so she agrees to stay with him in his gilded cage.
The author wraps up this entire emotional roller coaster with one final masterful couplet. The poem reads, "Yang catkins have scattered with the east wind, but the plum calyx can retain its late fragrance." What is the deeper meaning behind those specific metaphors?
The wordplay there is brilliant, holding decades of tragic history in just a few words. When the poet says Yang catkins have scattered, the word Yang is a direct reference to the emperor's most famous and now deceased favorite, consort Yang Guifei. During his frantic flight from the rebellion, the emperor was forced by his own mutinous guards to order her execution. She was the beautiful spring flower, violently blown away by the destructive east wind of the war.
And the plum calyx retaining its late fragrance.
That is Consort May. Remember, May means plum. She represents the winter flower. She is the one who endured the freezing, bitter cold of the rebellion, surviving the impossible. Now she's the one remaining to offer her warmth, loyalty, and fragrance to him in the deep winter of his life.
The emperor, or Sheng Wang, is living out his twilight years back in the capital.
Right, he survived the worst of it.
Exactly. On paper, he's comfortable. He has returned from exile in Sichuan. He has attendants like Consort Mei, and the rebellion's immediate threat is past. But internally, the man is a ghost.
He's just hollowed out.
Completely. He's entirely consumed by the past, specifically the shadow of Yang Guisei's death. And his first instinct upon returning is a deeply human one, I think. He wants to give her a proper, dignified reburial to replace the chaotic, hasty grave that was dug at Maui.
Which makes sense, right? You want to honor the person you loved.
But he immediately hits a political brick wall in the form of an official named Li Ku.
Yeah, because the retired emperor might have prestige, but Li Ku serves as a very harsh reminder that he lacks absolute power now. Li Ku points out a really dangerous reality.
The guards.
Exactly. The Longwu Royal Guards are still active. These are the exact same military forces who executed Yang Guifei's cousin, Yang Guzong, and effectively forced the emperor to order the consort's death in the first place, just to prevent a full-scale mutiny.
Right. They essentially held him hostage to that decision.
They did. So Li Ku warns him that if the emperor suddenly initiates a lavish public reburial for the consort, those guards are going to interpret it as the first step in a revenge plot against them.
Wow, so it could trigger another panic.
Or worse, another rebellion entirely.
It is such a stark image of his diminished status. He is effectively a prisoner to his own trauma and to the men who caused it. So to preserve the fragile peace of the state, he basically has to swallow his own mourning.
Which leads to this incredibly tense, covert operation.
Yeah. The emperor bypasses his official court entirely and summons his most trusted eunuch, Gao Lishi. And he gives him this secret directive. He says, go back to Maui off the books, quietly relocate her body to a more respectful grave, and retrieve any surviving belongings.
And the text takes a really unflinching, visceral turn here when Gao Lishi actually arrives at the north side of the West Road at the Maui station.
Yeah, he finds the original burial spot.
Right, he uncovers the grave, and the reality of death is just absolute. The novel describes how her body, her skin, her clothes, everything has completely turned to dust.
Time and decay have just erased her physical form entirely.
Completely.
The imagery is incredibly morbid, but out of all that destruction, Gao Lishi finds a single anomaly. Resting right where her chest would have been is a perfectly intact purple silk scent bag.
It's amazing.
It's this pristine, tiny object sitting amidst total decay. And the author provides these highly specific details about its survival. It was woven from ice silk, which was a luxury foreign tribute, and filled with a potent, exotic incense that actually repelled decay.
Think about the objects you keep in a shoebox under your bed.
Right.
Like an old movie ticket or a dried flower. Why do we trust inanimate objects to hold our most fragile memories? For the emperor, this isn't just a keepsake, it's a defiant piece of survival.
Defiant is the perfect word.
What's fascinating here is the stark contrast being drawn between the political fragility of the emperor's power and the physical durability of this foreign artifact. I mean, the emperor's empire fractured. His absolute authority was compromised by his own guards.
Yeah.
And the very flesh of the woman he loved has dissolved into ash. The human body and political power are both exposed as incredibly fragile constructs, yet this scent bag, made from foreign materials, survives completely untouched by the domestic political ruins surrounding it.
It almost feels mocking in its perfection,
Yeah.
you know? But I think it also serves as the ultimate metaphor for how the emperor views his own past. That surviving scent bag represents an idealized, indestructible memory of the consort. It is completely untouched by the ugly, messy, humiliating political realities of her death. He can hold that pristine purple silk and connect with the romance of their history, willfully ignoring the brutal reality of the dust it was buried in.
He is using the object to curate his grief, but the text quickly pivots to show us what happens when an intimate object falls out of that carefully curated royal sphere and into the hands of the public.
Yes, which brings us to the second artifact Gao Lishi finds, the brocade sock. And this takes the narrative in a wildly different, deeply uncomfortable direction.
It really does.
Gao Lishi is still in the Maui area when he hears a rumor about another item belonging to Yang Guifei. He ends up acquiring this brocade sock, but he has to pay 10,000 cash to get it.
10,000 cash.
Right. And the survival story of this sock is fascinating because it highlights the class disparity of a national tragedy. After the royal carriage fled the post station, local postal workers were sent in to literally sweep up the mess.
Just everyday people cleaning up after a disaster.
Exactly. A worker named Kian is cleaning near a Buddhist temple wall, and he finds a single sock hidden away.
And Qian immediately recognizes the value of what he's found. He knows it belongs to a royal concubine, so he smuggles it home and gives it to his mother, who the text refers to as Mother Qian.
And the visual description of this sock is stunning. It's a dazzling 5-color brocade embroidery featuring twin lotus flowers blooming on a single stalk. Even more hauntingly, the consort's perfume still lingers on the fabric.
So it's an intensely personal, intimate garment.
Yeah, but Mother Qian doesn't treat it like a sacred relic of a fallen dynasty. She treats it like a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
She creates a Tang Dynasty side hustle. At first, she just gossips and shows it to her neighbors. But as word spreads, people become morbidly fascinated. Strangers start showing up at her door, and Mother Qian starts charging admission.
It is a brilliant commentary on the commodification of grief. For the emperor, this tragedy was a world-ending sacred event. For a working-class peasant family sweeping up the post station, it is quite literally a way to pay the bills. Mother Qian capitalizes on a very recognizable human obsession with proximity to fame and death.
And she scales the business up, too. As the crowds grow, she demands more money, eventually charging 100 copper coins just for a quick peek at the sock. The text notes she amassed tens of thousands of coins.
That's a fortune for her.
It's staggering to think about everyday people emptying their pockets to stare at a dead woman's footwear. But it also forces you to think about our modern world. Consider our own obsession with celebrity memorabilia, or the way tourists flock to the sites of historical tragedies.
Dark tourism.
Exactly. Human nature hasn't changed. We still want to buy a ticket to touch the remnants of someone else's disaster.
And the author makes this public spectacle even more jarring by revealing the deeply private backstory of the sock. The text explains that this specific style was known as the ulai, or the lotus root shoe.
Oh, this part is so sad.
It is. Yang Guifei favored these lotus-embroidered socks, and the emperor used to playfully tease her about them. He would joke that if the embroidery on the outside was a vibrant lotus flower, then the pure white foot hidden inside must be the white lotus root, the O.
That is such a tender, private joke between lovers. And now that intimacy is stripped away, exposed to thousands of gawking strangers for 100 coins a pop. It feels like a total violation.
It is a violation.
And the author doesn't just let that sit. The chapter weaves in actual poetic commentary to dissect the ethics and the philosophy of this moment.
Right. The text includes a discussion of the poet Liu Yuxi's Ma Wei song, which hones in on this exact violation of privacy. Liu Yuxi invokes the imagery of the sock that treads on waves, which is a classic literary trope used to describe mythical, untouchable goddesses.
So elevating her to myth.
Exactly. And he contrasts that mythic elevation with the transactional reality of the sock being handled, sniffed, and viewed by the masses. The lingering scent of the perfume becomes a symbol of lingering humiliation.
But there is another poetic layer the text introduces, which takes a more philosophical stance on memory itself. There are poems inserted here that argue about the futility of clinging to this physical artifact.
The whole idea that physical things just don't last.
Right. The argument goes, so what if Mother Qian has a physical piece of brocade? That material object is woven from threads that will eventually fray, fade, and turn to dust, just like the body in the grave. The poem compares Yang Guifei to Shishi, a legendary beauty from antiquity, arguing that true immortality doesn't live in a surviving piece of silk.
It lives in the intangible.
Yes, in stories, in memory, in art. Charging coins to look at a decaying sock is ultimately a meaningless attempt to capture a legacy that has already moved into the realm of myth.
And that philosophical argument serves as the perfect bridge to the next sequence of the chapter. Gao Lixi brings both the pristine scent bag and the recovered brocade sock back to the retired emperor. The emperor looks at them, weeps over them, and stores them away. But these physical objects, no matter how perfectly preserved or intimately connected to his past, fail to bring him any real solace. The material world is just insufficient for the scale of his grief.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because physical objects fail, the narrative shifts entirely to the realm of intangible art. The setting moves to the Qinzheng Tower at night. The emperor is grief-stricken, unable to sleep, staring out at the smoke and clouds, completely lost in his memories.
It's such a cinematic image.
It really is.
Yeah.
And in the quiet of the night, he hears a distant, clear, singing voice drifting through the air. He listens, recognizes the style, and comes to a tragic realization. His favorite musician from his glory days, a man named Huang Fenshuo, has recently passed away.
And the loss of Huang Fanchu represents the vanishing of an entire era. It's not just the consort who is gone, it is the entire cultural ecosystem they inhabited. The artists, the musicians, the court life that defined his reign, it is all slipping away.
Feeling the crushing weight of this compounding loss, the emperor summons two musicians who are still with him, Li Mo and Zhang Yehu. He asks them to perform an original composition of his, a piece titled Rain Drenching the Bells or Yulinling.
And the performance described in the text is haunting.
Yeah.
Yehu sings with an open throat, and Limo accompanies him on a magical short flute supposedly gifted by a fairy. The music they produce is profoundly devastating. It is described as literally weeping and complaining, sending waves of intense sorrow over anyone within earshot.
And to really grasp that, you have to know where the song came from.
Right, the origin story of the melody. The text provides a flashback that takes us out of the comfortable capital and back to the terrifying, muddy reality of the emperor's retreat toward Chengdu during the rebellion.
That flashback is an absolute masterclass in setting a mood. The emperor is at the Shigu Pass. It has been raining for 10 relentless days.
Just miserable.
He is cold, he's exhausted, his empire is burning, and he's just been forced to execute the love of his life. As his carriage navigates these treacherous, rough-hewn wooden plank roads carved into the mountains, the bells attached to the carriage are jingling constantly.
In the rain.
In the endless rain, echoing through the desolate valleys, the sound is agonizing. It is the literal soundtrack to the lowest, most powerless moment of his entire life.
He is a man who previously controlled the known world, now reduced to shivering in a carriage, tormented by the noise of his own retreat. So he complains to his musician, the very same Huang Fanchuo, who has just died in the present timeline. He tells Huang that the sound of the bells is unbearable.
And the interaction that follows is just brilliant. You would expect a court musician to bow, agree, and offer empty comforts to a grieving monarch. Instead, Huang Fanchuo makes a joke.
A very risky joke.
Yeah, he tells the emperor that the bells are being disrespectful and ought to be punished. The emperor is confused, of course. How can a piece of metal be disrespectful? Huang Fanchuo replies, listen closely, they're saying San Lang Lang Dang.
It is an incredibly bold, almost insubordinate piece of wordplay. Sanlang was the emperor's informal family nickname, and Langdang carries a dual, meaning it is the onomatopoeia for the clinking of bells or chains, but it also means to be down and out, destitute, or ruined.
So he's calling him a failure.
Essentially, yes. The musician is looking at the most powerful man in the world who has just lost everything and joking that the carriage bells are mocking him, calling him a down-and-out failure.
It almost feels like an act of artistic alchemy. Think about it.
Yeah.
The emperor is at rock bottom, but instead of flying into a rage at this cheeky joke, he laughs.
He needed it.
He actually appreciates the dark gallows humor of San Lang Lang Dang.
Yeah.
And then he takes the rhythmic cadence of that mocking phrase and he uses it as the foundational melody for Rain Drenching the Bells. He takes the literal annoying sound of his own political and personal ruin and weaponizes it into a musical masterpiece.